Good morning, Year 7. So, what we're going to do is we're going to carry on with our sex ed lessons today, and what I'm going to ask you to do is to learn about the menstrual cycle. Now, the menstrual cycle is something that people don't actually generally know a huge amount about, but it's incredibly important for human reproduction. And we'll go into what it is in just a second. But before we do that, there's 5 questions on the board. Now, if you were sat in one of my lessons in school, these are the 5 starter questions you'd be doing, and I'd like you to have a go at them now. Now, you don't need to write full answers, just the general short answer. Back of your book if you've got one, or just on a piece of paper, I don't mind. So, pause me, have a go at these questions. Should take you about 4 minutes. Right then. So, function of the testes, hopefully everyone said, to produce sperm. Not to store sperm. That is the classic error. Sperm don't store in the testes. They don't stay there. They can't stay there. They can't live there. It's just where they're made. Alright? That's where they're made. That's like the difference between an oven and a fridge. You can make food in an oven, but don't try and store food in an oven. You can make sperm in testes, but don't try and store them in the testes. Fine. Gone over that. Don't say it. What's the function of an egg cell? Well, the function of an egg cell is to meet the sperm cell, to join together with the sperm cell, and that will create a cell which will then grow and divide and become a baby. We'll learn all about that next lesson. Where would sperm and egg meet inside the woman? Classic error people make is to say uterus. So if you know your female reproductive system, which you should, then you will know that the uterus, and I'll show you a picture in a second, the uterus is kind of in the middle. So sperm come in at the vagina, they have to swim through the cervix, then they get to the uterus. Then you go through the oviduct, and at the end of the oviduct, or fallopian tube, is the ovary. And so if sperm and egg mate in the middle, they'd meet in the uterus. But that is not what happens. They meet in the fallopian tube, because sperm are much, much, much faster than eggs. And so if they're released at the same time, which they're not, to be fair, if they were released at the same time, the sperm would get much further than the egg, and so the egg actually meets it just outside the ovary. And even still, sperm have to be released a good amount before the egg, because it takes them a long time, days, to swim that far. Okay? Excuse me. What does the cervix do? The cervix is for keeping out bacteria, largely. It's full of mucus, it's very thin, it's hard for things to get through. A lot of the sperm will die there, but pretty much all bacteria will die there. What's the uterus for? The uterus is the area of the woman's body where a baby will grow if she becomes pregnant. So far, hopefully we all remember the reproductive systems. Let me show you a picture of them just to kind of get the idea again. So there we go. Now, this is a slightly more complicated male reproductive system. Don't worry about that. So we've got the sperm being made in the testicle, travelling up, kind of getting stored in one of these vesicles, then getting mixed with some fluids from the glands, going down the urethra and coming out through the penis. That gets placed inside of the vagina during sex. So the penis goes inside of the vagina during sex, and that's how the sperm is released. The sperm comes out through the end of the urethra, same place the pee comes out, and goes into the vagina. That sperm then swims up through the cervix, which you can see. Actually, this is probably a better image than one we had last week. It swims up through the cervix and into the uterus. And this whole thing here, this blob in the middle here, is the uterus. Now, this is where a baby would sit. The sperm swims through there. It's got nothing of interest in the uterus. It gets to the fallopian tubes, and that's where it meets the egg. From the ovary, which has been stored in the ovaries do store eggs, and then the egg gets released into the fallopian tube, and that's where the sperm and egg meet. Now, the bit we're going to focus on today is the female reproductive system, because we're going to learn all about menstrual cycle. Now, the menstrual cycle includes what we would call the period. So if you have learnt about girls' periods, that's going to come up today as part of the menstrual cycle. And that's the most visible part of the menstrual cycle. But let me talk you through the whole thing. But it's all to do with the uterus. Alright? It's all to do with the uterus. And that's that blob in the middle where the baby's going to grow. You've got to get that if you're going to get today's lesson. So, here's the issue. And incidentally, while I'm going through, please don't write the notes. I'm going to go through them twice. So let me just go through it quickly the first time. You can write the notes the second time. So here's the first thing. the egg has to be released. Now the egg has to be released, and it happens about 14 days after the start of her period. Now we're going to learn all about the period in just a second, so don't worry about that. But if you remember that an egg is released on what we're going to call, excuse me, day 14 of the cycle, which just means it's about 14 days after the period starts. We'll touch on that in a minute. The egg is released into this fallopian tube. So it gets kicked out, and that is called ovulation. And ovulation is a really, really key term. Ovulation is when the egg is released. And so if you want to get pregnant, if you're a woman who wants to have a baby, your partner and you want to have a baby, you have to know roughly when ovulation is happening, because you want the sperm to reach there just as ovulation is happening. And then the sperm will meet the egg, boom, you've got a baby. Learn all about that next lesson. But that's about day 14 of this cycle. Now here's the thing. Cells are not meant to live on their own. All your cells are joined together, and they're all joined to your blood, which has oxygen and nutrients. So the egg can't survive for very long on its own. It only survives about 24 hours if it doesn't meet any sperm. After 24 hours, it dies. So you are going to have a very short window every month where you can get pregnant. Be careful there, because actually ovulation isn't reliable. It can happen at almost any time. So this isn't like we know we can only get pregnant on the 3rd and 4th of each month. But after an egg is released, which usually happens about day 14, you've only got a day, and then the egg dies. So egg is released day 14. If there's no sperm around, egg dies day 15 or 16. Not much time. But if you don't want to get pregnant, if you don't want to be pregnant, then the egg dying is just something that happens. And it happens every single month, from when girls hit puberty to when they reach what we call the menopause, which is when they stop having the menstrual cycle, they stop having a period, they can't have children anymore. So, any girl who's gone through puberty, every month, day 14 of their cycle, not necessarily the 14th of the month, but day 14 of their cycle, roughly, releases an egg into the fallopian tube. Day 15, that egg will die. 15 or 16. Now, during that point, the body has to get ready for just in case there is going to be a baby. And the main thing the body has to get ready is the uterus. The uterus is going to be where the baby will sit for 9 months, and that's going to be how long it takes for a baby to grow, more or less. 9 months. And so the lining of the uterus has to be really thick, and it has to be full of nutrients and blood vessels so that the egg, when it gets to the uterus, has enough oxygen and nutrients to live. So we need the lining of the uterus, which is, this isn't a great picture because it shows actually a disease, but that's not really relevant. But if you look at this kind of dark pink bit, that's what you're looking at as the lining. That needs to be packed full of blood, packed full of nutrients. Right? So this is happening pretty much throughout the month. The body is getting ready for a baby to be stuck in the uterus. Every single month. Because the body doesn't know if you're going to have sex or not. The body doesn't know if they're going to need sperm or not. It has to get ready no matter what. So every single month, from when a girl hits puberty to when she goes through the menopause, she'll be having this happen. Now, I'll be honest, that's a slight lie, because if you're pregnant, it doesn't happen. If you're breastfeeding, it often doesn't happen. And some conditions can cause it not to happen as well. Even some drugs you can take. But most women, every month. Right. If the egg dies, let's say you don't have sex and there's no sperm, and so the egg doesn't get fertilized, day 16 it dies, the body needs to get rid of all that lining. It needs to get rid of all that oxygen and nutrients and blood and all of that stuff, blood vessels, because if you leave it there, the issue here is, because the uterus is just above the vagina, because the vagina is just above the open world, bacteria could technically get inside of the uterus, And if it got inside of the uterus and it had loads of lining there, it'd be a perfect place for bacteria to grow. So the lining, which is full of nutrients, is actually a bit of a danger. It's a bit of an issue. You don't want the lining to be sat there all the time. And if you're not pregnant, you want the lining gone. So, if the egg dies without being fertilized, the lining of the uterus breaks down and is released with the dead egg during what we call menstruation. Now, menstruation is what we call a period. Now, what this looks like is blood coming out of the vagina of the woman and into the open world, and that blood is going to contain the dead egg and all of the lining that they built up just in case it got pregnant. So we build up this lining ready for the baby, full of oxygen and nutrients, all this stuff. Had to get rid of that in case bacteria live in it, because you're not pregnant. And so we lose that. Now, people who haven't had periods, which obviously you guys haven't because you're all boys, don't tend to know like how much blood that is. And what you're looking at is about 6 to 8 teaspoons over the course of between 3 and 7 days, usually. So about 30 ml. It's not enormous amounts of blood. It tends to be more blood lost towards the beginning of the period, it lasts a few days. There'll be more blood lost towards the beginning of the period, tends to be. And if you can lose up to about 60 mils before it becomes an issue. It's not huge amounts, but it can be unpleasant for women. It can be very uncomfortable and make you feel nasty. And because there's lots of hormones involved, it can also affect your mood, can make you unhappy. And so periods, for some women, can be a real issue, actually. So menstruation can be a real issue because it can make them really unhappy because of the pain and because of the mood changes caused by the hormones. So it's really, for some women particularly, quite an uncomfortable time. But it happens about once a month. Once every 28 days is kind of your average, but it's really variable. For about between 3 and 7 days again, but really variable. Okay, most women are sitting about 5 days bleeding every 28-ish days. Okay, now it's perfectly normal, it happens to every woman, and it's really necessary because, as I say, you've got to get this lining ready every month, but you also can't keep this lining every month. Fine. I will go back to the notes in just a second, but I just want to kind of make you see that this is a big cycle. It's quite difficult to show a cycle without showing you this little diagram. And you're going to have your own one of these to fill in a second, which is what this task on the left says. Ignore that for a second because we're going to take some notes first. But you can see, about day 1 to day 5, the woman is going to be having her period, menstruation, losing blood. Now this is why we're using things, women use things like tampons, which are basically absorbent pieces of cloth, really, which go inside of the vagina to soak up the blood, or sanitary pads, which are absorbent pieces of cloth which they stick to the inside of their knickers, again, to catch the blood. But between about day 1 and 5, for about 5 days, can be longer, can be shorter, we're going to be bleeding. At the end of that, your body's like, well, okay, that's done. We've got rid of the old lining. Let's start again. Let's get a new egg ready. The old egg died. Let's get a new egg ready. So about day 6, you start prepping a new egg. You start pumping it full of nutrients for its survival. You get it all ready to be released. That takes to about day 13 or 14. Now down here, somewhere between day 13 and 15, the egg will be released. Most periods. Most cycles, excuse me. So the egg gets released. Remember the word ovulation. Ovulation. Menstruation, period, ovulation, egg being released. So about day 14, the egg is released. It then carries on its merry way. Now, day 16, by that point, it's either going to get fertilized, i.e. sperm's going to reach it, or it's going to die. Dead. If sperm reaches it, happy days, you're pregnant. Fantastic. Perhaps. For most people, that would be fantastic. Great. Good. In which case, this thick black lining we've got here will stay there. The egg will get stuck into that lining, and we'll learn all about this next week, so don't worry about memorizing this right now. But you'll be pregnant, and you won't have a period. No period, no menstruation if you're pregnant, because the whole point is if you bleed, it takes the egg away, If it's been fertilised and you're pregnant, you don't want that. So, between about day 16 and roughly day 28, the egg, if it's not been fertilised, will be dead, but your body doesn't realise initially. So it keeps pumping that lining, pump it full of nutrients, full of oxygen, full of blood. Let's pump it, pump it, pump it, until you can see, you get something like C here, we've got this massive, thick lining. And on day 28-ish, your body realises, egg's dead, darn. So we have the period again. Get rid of that lining. Day 1 to 5, bleeding. Start again. Right? Every single month. Fine. Let's take some notes on this, because I've spent some time on this now. So, back to the beginning. So, at the end of this, I'm just going to very briefly run you through this, then you need to pause me and take the notes. So, day 14, you need to write that down somewhere. This is day 14 is ovulation. You can say 13 to 15, 14 is a good number. And that's when the egg is released. Pause me, get those notes. Roughly day 16, egg is either fertilised or it dies. And most of the time it's going to die, because most of your life you're not pregnant. So, day 16, egg dies, or maybe fertilised. Pause me, get the notes. Right, day 16 to 28-ish, day 16 to 28, the uterus lining builds up, ready for potential fetus. That word there just means a small ball of cells that will become a baby. A fetus, a little fetus, can become a big baby. Pause me, get the notes. And then finally, if the egg dies, without the lining without the egg being fertilised, then on day 1 to about day 5, days 1 to 5, you're going to have your menstruation, your period, bleeding from the vagina. Just it looks like a fair amount of blood, actually. I mean, it's not insignificant. It's very uncomfortable, but it's not huge amounts. It definitely doesn't hurt the woman. But we're going to bleed, and we're going to have a sanitary pad or a tampon. There are a couple of other things you can do, but those are the main two. And that's going to catch the blood. Okay. Right. So let's go. I'm assuming you paused me and did those notes. If you didn't, do. Let's move on to the task, the main task for this lesson. And the main task for this lesson is this little diagram. Now this would have been attached to your assignment, I hope. If it hasn't been, you just need to stick a little note on your team wall and just say, "Sir, could you attach the menstrual cycle diagram, please?" Because you need this diagram. Now, I will get up what you should be seeing on your Word document. Give me 30 seconds. So this is what you should be seeing. Pause. Right, sorry about that. So this is what you should be seeing. This is the sheet you should have. Let me make it a bit bigger. There we go. So, the menstrual cycle. So what I need you to do, and remember all these steps. This is the most important task. This is the task to show you've got it. So, firstly, I need you to get some colours, or if you really don't have colours anywhere in your house, you can just shade in different ways. You could do one with little lines, one with crosses. Pick a way of shading. Right. Fine. I need you to colour or shade in the days where the period is happening, the egg is developing, the egg is released, the uterus continues to get itself ready, and the egg might be fertilised, and I need a key. So you could just put the coloured box next to this bit if you wanted. So I could say, well, maybe this first one is red. The period's happening, red. The period's happening, there's going to be some blood, maybe I'll make that red. Fine. The egg is developing, green. Fine, green. And you've got to shade in the days. So I'll give you the first... No, I won't. I won't give you any. Let's say you said, oh, the period is happening between days 6 and 12. You'd be wrong. But let's say I did. Between days 6 and 12, the period is happening. I would shade 6 red, 7 red, 8 red, 9 red, and so on. Right? Simple. That's the first bit. Now, then at the bottom, and this is the bit people deliberately forget to do, it's actually the most difficult bit. I need to get these things, and if you're printing it out and cutting and sticking, which is quite a good way to do it, I think, because it makes your brain work, then I need you to cut out these little boxes, and then you just put them in the right place. Between day 1 and 5, the uterus lining is shed, a small amount of blood is released. This is called the woman's period. If you can't figure out that's between day 1 and 5, there are bigger issues than the menstrual cycle. It tells you. Okay, so just cut that out and stick that in the right place. Right? But you need for each one to stick it in the right place. So by the end of this, I need a diagram where it's coloured in with a little key, i.e. it's going to tell you which colour is which. And I need the boxes around here. Now, if you're doing it on your computer, you won't be able to cut them out, obviously. And actually, the way this sheet's been created makes it a little bit difficult. What you actually need to do is to make yourself a little copy of this, like that. Then you need to go to Format. Let me get myself out of the way. You click Crop. You need to do this, crop it down to the right size. Maybe you need to stick it as square as well. And then you just need to bring it up. Put it on the picture in the right place. He says his picture disappearing. I suppose my menstrual cycle will have to be square as well, won't it? Right. Which is just why I think it's so much easier to print it out if you've got a printer, but I appreciate some people don't. What you need to end up with is something like that, and then you should colour in the right bits. Okay, but you should get all 5 boxes. If you can do that, and I'll give you the answers in literally 30 seconds, then you should be absolutely understanding the menstrual cycle. So pause for me. This should take you a good amount of time. If you've got to print it out, it will take you even longer. So this is pretty much the rest of the lesson, in all honesty. All right, so I'm going to pause me and fill in this diagram. So, hopefully you paused me. If you didn't, do. So, and incidentally, a note on cheating. Right, I know, you know, you get this blank diagram, you could listen to me give you the answers, you could stick it in perfect. And there are some people who are either so lazy or so afraid of being wrong that they all right now have their blank diagram in front of them and just be waiting for me to give them the answers so that they can get it perfect, upload it to Teams, and everyone will love them and think they are wonderful. Please don't do that. A, if you're lazy, don't be lazy. And B, if you're worried about getting it wrong, you've got to get things wrong in order to improve. Maybe you get something wrong here. It's not the most difficult task, but maybe you get something wrong here. It happens. But please do not just write down what I tell you. If you've not actually done this task yet, pause it and do it properly. If you have already done the task, if this is already coloured or shaded, great. So, in that case, you should have shaded between day 1 and 5 for this particular woman, the period is happening. So if that's red, then the red should mean the period is happening between day 1 and 5. Remember, this is different for every single woman. Some women bleed more, some women bleed less, some women have longer periods, some women have shorter periods. Different for every single woman. Then you come to day 6 to 12. Between day 6 and 12, the egg is developing. So you should have shaded between day 6 and 12, the egg is developing. Then you come to day 13 to 15. Now, I would have picked 14. But if you've shaded 13 to 15, that's fine too. The egg is released. The egg is released. So, here's a point. Ovulation, we tend to say, happens day 14. And roughly, it will. Again, it's different for every woman. And again, it's different every month for the same woman. A lot of women have quite regular menstrual cycles that they can predict quite effectively. And you can get little apps on your phone that will tell you roughly when you're going to ovulate. Women do that so that they can get pregnant if they want to. But sometimes your body will just throw a spanner in the works and drop an egg on day 6, let's say. Or on day 27. You can even release an egg when you are having your period, if something goes wrong. So it is possible to be pregnant at any point. And this is why when we come to contraception, which is preventing yourself getting pregnant, this will be an issue, because you can't assume that you will not get pregnant if you just don't have sex around these days. People who have sex and do not want to have a baby need to use contraception, which is things to stop yourself getting pregnant. We'll come to them in a minute. Well, in all honesty, in 2 lessons. So, the egg is released, 13 to 15. I would have picked 14. That's fine. The uterus continues to get itself ready, 16 to 28. Slight spanner in the works. The egg might be fertilised roughly day 16, 15 maybe. Fine. So you kind of need to colour these two in two different colours. Because 15 and 16, the egg could be fertilised. Alright, then come to the boxes at the bottom. Between day 1 and 5, the uterus lining is shed, goes between days 1 and 5. The egg travels down the fallopian tube and the uterus lining continues to thicken. It's between days 16 and 28. The egg dies if it's not fertilised about day 16. Between day 13 and 15, an egg is released from one of the two ovaries. Well, that's between day 13 and 15. By day 27, the uterus lining starts to break down. That's day 27. And the lining of the uterus starts to grow and an egg ripens in the ovary. I hate that word ripens. I love this sheet, but I hate that word ripens. The word you want is matures. But ripens will do you fine. Between day 6 and 12. Day 6 and 12 is obvious. But no, it's not. It didn't say. Sorry. Between day 6 and 12, the lining of the uterus is going to continue to grow. And an egg ripens in the ovary. It's not obvious. That's when it happens. Right. Now, this is the menstrual cycle. It's incredibly important that you understand this. You may not think about it now. Some people will, but you may not think about it now. A lot of you will want to have children in the future. Whether you do now or whether you don't now. In order to have children, you can just scattergun it, but it's very helpful to understand the menstrual cycle. Because if you want to have a child, the best days to have sex are between days 11 and 13, let's say, in the hope that the sperm will travel for about a day and will arrive there just about day 14 or 13 if the egg is released early. Also, any woman, any girl you go out with, date, marry even, will obviously be going through this. And so it's really helpful for you to understand that because, again, you might not think about it right now, but being able to understand what women are going through when it comes to their periods is extremely important. It helps you to be understanding. So please make sure you understand this point. If you did not understand any of this, if you got anything wrong here, just rewind back to the beginning of the video. Do not watch the whole thing again. Just get back to the slide where I'm talking about the bit you got wrong and watch that minute and a half, 2 minutes. Because you've got to understand this. It's really important. It will come up a lot in your life. It will be a thing that comes up. It will be a thing that you need to know about. Right, how much time have we got? Give me a second. Now I'm going to leave it there. It's going to start a new topic. I'm going to leave it there. If you finished a bit early, which you might have done, good. If it's taking you longer than 50 minutes, I want to hear about it because, again, I'm not quite sure how long it should take. The video took about 28 minutes, but it may be that it took you longer than 20 minutes to do all the tasks, notes and whatnot. Right, I'm going to leave you there. Next lesson is fertilization and development of an embryo, creating a baby. So really, really fascinating lesson next time. I hope you'll find it really interesting. But I hope you have a very good day. I'll look forward to seeing you whenever I'm able.